Let's imagine how enjoyable family life in Singapore would be if Singaporeans have stable jobs, can afford the cost of living with 1.5 incomes, can easily get a house to form a family whenever they are ready, and can spend quality time with children who are free from exam pressures. Grandparents can spend time taking care of grandchildren with a caregiving allowance from the government instead of working in old age. I'm confident that more Singaporeans will be willing to have children if we can create such an environment for families. The low TFR is an existential problem which should be tackled as a national emergency. If our current birth rate persists, there will only be 12 great-grandchildren for every Singaporean born today. There's little point in increasing the reserves if we do not have a future generation to leave the reserves to. We should use our hard-earned savings to invest in our people and reimagine our social economic policies so that more Singaporeans will consider parenthood a meaningful and attainable journey. Sir, in conclusion, PSP believes that we will not be able to reverse the decline in our TFR by simply reviewing and updating our current policies. We already know that these policies are ineffective, and that's why we are facing a national emergency today. What we urgently need is to reimagine some new policies and mobilize the whole of government and whole of society to create an environment that is conducive for families and raising children. PSP has provided some new ideas as a starting point and hope that this will develop into a national action plan. As such, Mr. Speaker, may I seek your permission to move an amendment to the motion?
Now let me deal with the amendment proposed by Mr. Leong. The proposed amendment is this. Let me read out the original motion, then I will read out the amendment. The original motion is that this House calls for the continued review and updating of policies to better support families, as well as the marriage and parenthood aspirations for Singaporeans, and endorses a whole-of-society approach to build a Singapore made for families. Mr. Leong's proposed amendment is to delete the words continued review and updating and substitute instead the word reimagination. So if you do that, and if you insert his amendment, it will read as follows: that this House calls for the reimagination of policies to better support families, as well as the marriage and parenthood aspirations for Singaporeans, and endorses a whole-of-society approach to build a Singapore made for families. Ordinarily, Mr. Speaker, I would have no issue with such a proposed amendment because, after all, why would one object to the idea of reimagining something and making sure that you come up with something new? Except that in this context, the amendment, there are two reasons why I would not support the amendment. The first is that in this context, it's actually not a step forward, it's a step back. And second, it is tied to a policy which is problematic. And let me explain why. So the first reason, why do I say that the amendment is actually a step back? Well, it's because in this debate, I think Mr. Leong, Ms. Hazel Pua, and Mr. Louis Chua have sought to portray the MNP measures that we have at the moment as incremental. So in other words, not bold enough, not doing enough, therefore you need to reimagine something. But the point is this: in the last few years, we've already started the reimagination process. It's called Forward SG. And if you look at what we did with Forward SG, you will see that when Forward SG was launched, then DPM Lawrence Wong said at the launch of the Forward Singapore exercise in June 2022 that the 4G team was going to embark on an exercise to review and refresh our social compact and chart a roadmap for the next decade and beyond. And just before he became PM, he said in an interview with local media, "We are prepared to relook everything. It's not so much that we're going to slay a sacred cow for doing so, but we are prepared to re-examine all our assumptions and consider, under different circumstances, different societal expectations and needs, what might we do differently?" And we've already started this process because the Forward SG work has already started. So what are some of the major moves that we have done? We've done quite a few things. If you think about it, the HDB new classification framework, that is a major move. For decades, we have had the mature and non-mature classification. But this came out of Forward SG. We launched it last year, and it is a major move that is just starting to take place, and we're rolling it out. So it is actually being implemented. The other major moves would be for preschool. We have enhanced access to affordable, quality preschool. We've ramped up the infant care capacity threefold over the last 10 years, and by the end of this year, we will achieve our commitment to provide government-supported places to cater for 80% of preschools. And we've also lowered the out-of-pocket expenses and are subsidizing, and we have had subsidy enhancements and fee cap reductions. And education, we have made big, bold changes in education under the Equip pillar of Forward SG. We have removed the PSLE T-score. We have removed mid-year exams. We have now a full implementation of full subject-based banding, and we are broadening the post-secondary pathways. And in addition, we've got shared parental leave. That is another major, major move. 10 weeks of government-paid leave, which is going to cost us something to the tune of 400 million per year. And this was under the care pillar of Forward SG. And also flexible work arrangements. We've introduced the tripartite guidelines. All these are major moves with a vision of a Singapore made for families. So we've already started the reimagination process. The boat called reimagination has already left port and is sailing. It is heading out towards open waters, it's chugging along, it's picking up speed, and we are implementing, adding on, and enhancing as we go. So to ask us in this amendment to start reimagination is kind of like a step back. It's kind of like going to the port, whereas the ship has already sailed. And that's the reason why I would not agree to the amendment. That's the first reason. But there's a second reason, and it's a bit problematic. That's because in his speech on calling for reimagination, Mr. Leong has also said that we need to adopt certain policies, and one of the central ones is the Affordable Homes Scheme. I mean, the other ideas and suggestions certainly we can think about and explore, but the Affordable Homes Scheme is the one that removes the price of land when pricing flats upfront, and that is problematic because PSP's Affordable Homes Scheme is akin to a prepaid rental scheme that turns Singaporeans from homeowners to tenants, and users only have the option to buy the flat at the point when they are actually going to sell it, and it's a raid on the reserves. So for that reason, because in the context of this amendment, reimagination entails certain policies put forward by PSP, of which a key one is the Affordable Homes Scheme, which constitutes, amongst other things, a raid on the reserves, and I cannot support it. But, sir, other than that, I really do thank members for their support for families, their ideas and suggestions, which we will continue to take on board, and I support the original motion. Thank you.
Mr. Leong.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I thank the Minister and MOSs for their very comprehensive reply, especially the many points raised by the minister. As a result of that, I have many questions to ask. But first of all, I would like to ask the minister, today I think all of us agree that the low TFR and the declining TFR is a very serious problem for our country. So I'd like to know, I'd like to ask the minister, first of all, whether when we are debating the need for more policies, are we treating this as a national emergency or not? Or is just a business as usual, maybe we need more? But I think the most important thing that we need to agree is that this is a very urgent problem, and I would classify it as a national emergency. Would she agree to that first? My first question.
Mr. Leong, I would prefer that if you have clarifications, you did mention you have many clarifications. If you have, kindly raise all of them now. Clarifications and not speech, please.
Yes, yes. Because the ministers have said a list of things.
Sure. So list out all your clarifications so the minister will respond to your clarifications.
Okay. Okay, first of all, I want to ascertain whether we are debating this as a national emergency or not. The next thing is that the minister mentioned about reimagining, okay? So we raised the issue that the current and also our colleagues, my colleagues from Workers' Party also agree to that the current policies are obviously inadequate, right? So as a result, we need to have new policies. And there is a basis for us to say why the current policies need in reimagining. So we would like the minister to agree. I would like to ask the minister whether she agrees that when we imagine what I have suggested in my speech, for example, we are actually trying to engage all the stakeholders, a whole of society approach. The whole of society approach, when hearing from the office bearer, seems to be a shirking of responsibility. Say that it is not just the responsibility of the government, the society also has to help. But to us, the whole of society approach is that you must provide more fiscal incentives to involve more stakeholders. And does the minister agree that in our recommendation of the new policies, actually we actually consider stakeholders like the employers? Okay, you ask the employers to have more FWAs, you ought to give them more fiscal incentives. We talk about engaging the community, engaging the extended family, the grandparents who are giving care to the children. They ought to be remunerated. So we are trying to expand the scope of thinking. It's not just what the government has been doing, just from government to the parents. Okay? And furthermore, we are also expanding into thinking about the mental health of the children. Because happy
Mr.
children
Leong, you should be asking
happy
Mr.
life.
Leong, you should be asking clarifications.
So this is
you shouldn't be making any more speeches. As with any other members, just seek clarifications.
Yeah, I seek clarification from the
I'm not quite sure what your clarification is, but please state your clarifications.
That our reimagining is actually different from the kind of
Okay, you can go to your next clarification.
Yeah.
You talked about reimagining.
Okay. So when we say reimagining, we are of course confident that there are many gaps in the government, in the current policies of the government. Okay, I thank the minister for giving a list of policies that the government have, and I shall, one by one, ask her whether these are the gaps in the policies or not. Okay. First of all, under helping married couples with their first home, after all the policies that we have said here, how about the price of the HDB? It is still very high, right? So you haven't solved the problem. Two, you say you cannot reduce the waiting time to below 3 years, then the TFR cannot be improved. You have to do something about it. You didn't solve the problem, right? So our suggestion of AHS plus our millennial apartment scheme do provide a feasible solution. So this is the third question. Huh? Still got gaps, right? So secondly, when we want to encourage Singaporeans, especially mothers, to have babies, I think we ought to upgrade, the kind of help we're going to give them. So while you have done some of these and that, like before birth, you say now the MediSave is 50% increase from today, but this is from 1st April onwards. And that's one problem we think with the government policies implementation is that you always put it ahead. So many parents will feel shortchanged. In fact, I think the policy should be backdate 1 year, so to make the parents feel that I better get into the boat as soon as possible, rather than, I will give you the benefit in a few months' time. So that means you cause the parents to, maybe I should delay a few months and see whether maybe after budget, Yeah. So,
Mr. Leong, can you get to your clarifications? You are making a lot of mini speeches here. I implore you. I've said this many times to everyone. I'll say it again.
So that's I
allow you to make clarifications, as many as you want, but please make them and make it succinct.
Some clarifications
right? You don't have to state all
some clarification needs
your
to
preambles are super long. Right? So just state your clarifications.
So the fourth point
Many other members have stated their clarifications.
So the fourth point is that...
Let me finish, Mr. Leong, I'm speaking.
Okay, sir.
Many members, I allow members to seek clarifications, as many as you want. But don't make mini speeches. You are not allowed to make, as with any other member who has spoken, you are not allowed to make any more speeches. Seek clarifications, yes. I'll give you the floor. So please, you stated you have many clarifications. I'm giving you the floor to ask all your clarifications. Please ask your clarifications.
Okay. So thank you, sir. So the fourth clarification is that, do you think these policies ought to be implemented post-backdated rather than, forward-dated? And the fifth clarification I seek to get is that under supporting child's development and well-being, she mentioned the shift in the education system of that. But does the minister think that this is really sufficient? Because I think we still got a lot of feedback from the ground that the PSLE system is still a big burden on the families. Okay. So does she think that our suggestion of having a dual-track system can achieve 3 objectives at the same time? 1 is better family life, 2 is better child development, and 3 actually allows our children to have more social interaction time. This is the 5th point. And the 4th point, and the 6th point I want to make is that in terms of helping parents to balance work and all that, does she agree that our suggestion of an enhanced job sharing scheme has the following benefits? And actually it engages the employers better, rather than the current job sharing scheme of just providing $35,000. And the benefits of our job sharing scheme, enhanced job sharing scheme, does she agree that 1, it improves work-life balance. 2, Singapore workers can continue to be on the job without leaving the job market. And that is very important. Today, once Singaporean leaves the job market, it is very difficult for him or her to come back. And we all know that. Again, 3, actually, it can increase employment because it may allow a few more Singaporeans to have part of the job. And my last question, the seventh question, is that does she agree that since we want to build Singapore into a make-for-family Singapore, and we want to involve a whole of society effort, the best is to actually to engage the extended family and give incentives to the family. And that will make our overall plan far more effective. So that is the seventh question. Does she agree that this will be a more effective way of doing it? So in conclusion, I think what I'm trying to drive at is our reimagining is not just giving some money from government to parents. It's actually involving a lot of stakeholders and incentivizing them to take action in towards the same objective. Thank you.
Minister Indranee.
Mr. Speaker, sir, let me try and answer these clarification stroke speeches as succinctly as I can. First, he asked, is it a national emergency? I would rather put it this way. I think it is a very important national issue. Emergency sort of suggests the idea of all alarm bells ringing, everybody rushing around, and so on. But our approach is when you have a serious national issue, you look at it calmly, coolly, you understand what the issues are, and you then take the necessary steps to address them. And that leads on to his next point about reimagining, because Mr. Leong said that, have we engaged the stakeholders? And that's exactly what I was explaining just now. That was the whole purpose of the Forward SG exercise. And in fact, even before that, we had the Singapore Together conversations. So the point I'm making about the reimagination process, leave aside the policies that he has suggested. The amendments made it appear as though we have not even embarked on thinking about reimagining Singapore. And my reply to that was, we have already started the reimagination process, and we have done that under Forward SG, and we've done the engagements. In fact, if you take into account all the people that we have engaged through the various exercises, it's almost like 200,000 people, and that would include the families, family members, parents, etc. Then I think the next point that Mr. Leong raised was talking about whether the policies at work resulting in a low total fertility rate. I think the point I made in my speech, which I must reiterate here, is that declining total fertility rate is a global trend. It's not just Singapore. So, for example, between 2013 to 2023, I mean, when you look at all of the countries, Malaysia, France, Denmark, Sweden, UK, Japan, Singapore, South Korea, they're all on a downward trend. I think perhaps the only one that bucks the trend may be Israel, which was mentioned in one of the speeches. But in Malaysia, the TFR is 1.73. There's been a drop. It's been dropping and then just had a slight tilt up. In France, it's gone down to 1.68. Denmark is 1.50. Sweden 1.45. UK 1.44. Japan 1.20. Singapore 0.97. South Korea 0.72. So the point to be made is that it's not just us, which means that there is something happening at a global level. And those are the reasons which I mentioned earlier. So what is our approach? Our approach, because we embarked on this before, Mr. Leong asked, he set out a list of his policies and asked whether I could agree with each one of them. But we started this whole process before, this reimagination process before. We talked to people to understand what their concerns were. And their concerns were, as I mentioned in my speech, space, housing, costs for child raising, education or competitive stress, and time. And so we developed our policies specifically in response to what they told us, and this resulted in the reclassification framework, this resulted in the enhanced baby bonus, this resulted in the enhancements to childcare, this resulted in the shared parental leave, all of the things which I outlined. So as far as the list that Mr. Leong has put out of his proposed policies, those, if he's putting them forward as things which may be helpful, remember, as I mentioned in my closing of the speech, I said we can consider all of those. The main issue I had was with his affordable homes scheme. And because that constitutes a raid on the reserves and has all those other downsides, I really felt I could not support the amendment insofar as it was tied to that.
Mr. Leong.
Mr. Speaker, sir, two questions for the Minister, although she has avoided answering all the questions already. But I gave her two new questions. First of all, when we compare the global trend of TFR, why don't we compare ourselves with France, compare ourselves with those countries? Because although you have quoted a downward trend in the TFR as a global phenomenon, but other countries are able to maintain it at above 1.5, but we are 0.97. So does that difference mean there is a responsibility that the government has to take? First question. Second question is, the AHS, actually, the debate on the AHS is not complete. But I do not want to extend today's debate into the AHS. I have stated many times that I disagree that it's a raid on the reserve. Okay, and when you say that the AHS is actually a prepaid rental scheme, aren't the current system the same thing with the 99-year lease? Isn't the 99-year lease a prepaid rental scheme as well for 99 years? So please, don't use AHS to negate all the debate I'm trying to put up today. Do you agree?
Minister Indranee.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I wasn't sure I quite understood Mr. Leong's point about the global trends, because he referred to France, and which I had referred to, and France is also on a global decline as far as TFR is concerned. So I'm not quite sure, but the suggestion seems to be that government is responsible for 0.97 TFR. I think that that's not the case. It's a global trend. There are many factors which are affecting TFR, and I've listed them. No need to go through them again. But what can the government do? The government can do its very best to facilitate and try to make sure that we have an ecosystem and an environment that's as supportive of parents and couples and of marriage and parenthood as possible, which is exactly what we're trying to do. Then on the second point of AHS, well, I think we must certainly agree to disagree, because Mr. Leong may have his view on AHS, but I have mine. And I have to explain to the Chamber why I disagree with his proposed amendment. And his amendment, one of the key things is the AHS, and that's the part I disagree with. Remember, I said that the other things we can discuss. So this was the one that caused me a difficulty, and that's why I'm sharing with everybody why I think that I cannot support the amendment.
Mr. Leong.
Mr. Speaker, sir, as I said, I do not wish to go into AHS during this debate. But on the first question that I've asked just now, what I mean is that any phenomena that we observe, there's always a systemic factor and there's a specific factor. Other countries have also experienced a general decline in the TFR, but if other countries are still maintaining at 1.5 and our TFR has gone right below 1%, that is a difference. That's a difference, right? you're 0.5% below some countries that we can benchmark against, right? So of course you can choose South Korea. But South Korea, like some of the South Korea is like ourselves. The whole social economic model, there are issues to it. That's why we are saying that there's one systemic factor here and there's a specific factor. So I'm of the view that our policies have not addressed the specific factors. If we can say today that yes, we put up a national plan, but Singaporeans, I don't think we can move back up to 1.8% or 1.8 or 2, but let's fix a target of 1.4 within the next decade. Then we are talking. The government is making an effort and a commitment that we must reach there. You cannot just say that, oh, everything is dropping, we can't help it. More or less you say we can't help it. You know, that cannot be the case because then we'll be really running towards extinction. Do you agree to that? There's a specific factor.
Minister Indranee.
So I'm not sure how useful it is to prolong this debate, but you know, Mr. Leong says, the government says, can't help it. We never said can't help it. As far as this government's concerned, we want to make a Singapore that's made for families, and we are encouraging marriage and parenthood. So it's very odd because Mr. Leong says the government says something when the government has not said any such thing. Our policy is working. We have policies in the past which took us up to a certain point, but remember, we recognize that changes need to be made and things need to be looked at afresh. And that is exactly why we implemented Forward SG, and that's why we embarked on the process of looking at what new policies we can introduce. So insofar as he says, set a target, you can't just set a target for women to have children just like that. That's really, you know, I don't think that families or mothers will just produce big babies just because you set them a target. Having children is a personal decision, and it's really up to parents to decide if they want to have children. What we can and are doing is trying to make it as facilitative and as comfortable as possible for them to do so.
Ms. Sun Shelling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I just wanted to highlight another dimension to marriage and parenthood. And I'd like to cite a survey that was conducted by the National Youth Council together with the Institute of Policy Studies, which was published in August 2024. And 3,000 young people had been surveyed. They were aged between 17 and 24 years old. And in their list of priorities, they had prioritized the top life goals. I'm reading from the survey here that they are prioritized for the next 5 years. The first was being in good health. The second was having a good career. The third is having lots of money. The fourth is having financial security. Only at number 6 is it getting married, and having children is actually further down the list. I'm sharing this survey because it is published data. It is factual data. It is from a survey of young persons, and it's just to reinforce the point that Minister Indranee made, which is that when it comes to matters as personal as getting married and having children, it is not just like we, click our fingers and we say we want TFR to be this, that we can somehow command, young people to go forth, get married, and have children. We have to recognize that they have their own aspirations, and I think the survey results that we have shown here is not unique to Singapore. I think all across the world, when you look at published data, when you look at interviews with young people, I think the aspirations of young people have changed. And I think we have to recognize that. Thank you.
Mr. Leong, if you new clarifications, I will allow it, but there's no need to make the same point again.
Okay, my last question, Speaker, sir. Does the minister agree that when I say we set a target, we are not actually trying to force Singaporeans to have babies? We are saying that as a policy objective. You know, when we implement policies, we need an objective, right? So like when you build infrastructure, there's a population target, population that you're looking at, right? So here the same. We cannot be just, does she agree that we cannot be just implementing policies without thinking that whether those policies will yield a certain amount of results or not? And what that certain amount of results is equivalent to a target, whether it's a soft target or a hard target. That's all I want to say. I think I made my point already. Thank you.
I think you made the same point twice. Minister, do you want to respond?
So I think there is a difference. I mean, there are certain things where you can set targets, and there are certain things where you can be as encouraging and as facilitative as possible, but I don't think that you can put a finite measure on it. So we can say we want to build X kilometers of roads. We can have Y number of bridges. We can have, Z number of buildings. But I think it would be very difficult to say to Singaporeans, you must produce X number of babies. And I think what Mr. Leong should appreciate is that for infrastructure, maybe, for certain things, economic things, you can set certain specific targets. But when it comes to emotions, and when it comes to things like fertility, when it comes to personal decisions, those are very hard to quantify. So the approach that we have taken is to try and create a country, a society, an environment that is as encouraging and supportive as possible. And we hope that Singaporeans will be able to respond to that, because the policies that we are putting in place have been based on the feedback that they have given us.